Let's just zoom back a bit here and feeding the microbiome on a regular basis. What does the ideal look like?
Yeah, oh, this might catch some waves, I'll be honest, because it's not what's popular right now. So many people have gotten so sick with these chronic illnesses and had to go on really strict diets, and it is their survival, right? And I certainly understand that. I teach them, and I had to go on one myself. So I'm not telling anyone here to change their diet, but the diet for the birth microbes is very different than what I'm seeing around. It is more similar to what I see in a lot of the tribal regions and kind of across the globe. So things that are amazing for the birth microbes are things like green plantain starch is amazing for them, right? That's a very common food kind of belted around the world, and it feeds a broad range of the birth microbes. So if you're healthy enough, you can have those, right? Now, lots of people are going to have to stick to steak and they just can't. But if you can, that's great. Um, and now, really, I'm really not teaching gaps, really. Uh, because people's mucosa is so collapsed. So I've created a new system where I'm giving little bits of the birth microbes. I'm bringing the histamines down, and then doing the foods for the microbes. Uh, but to answer a question that I would imagine is percolating in the minds of listeners and watchers is what about the carnivore tribes, right? Because they don't need green plantain or anything like that. And that is correct. They don't. They're healthy as can be. It's very different when you're born into a natural microbiome. You live in a natural environment and you're constantly sharing that versus our current society. So I still teach carnivore, but I am screening for the mucosal collapse and things like that. So a good diet for the birth microbes would be funny things like hibiscus tea. And so some of them need polyphenols like hibiscus tea. Some of them need shrimp shells. Some of them need odd parts of animals. Some definitely need dairy and parts of dairy. Some need uh, a lot need, actually, a form of resistant starch, tiny amounts. We're not talking about a whole cup. We're talking about like a quarter of a teaspoon. It does a lot. So things like that. And you see them all around the world. So I can speak to like the regional diets of the different places I go. Acacia fiber is just massive. It's a big one in many parts of Africa that I go to. But I would say by and large, the most common one that I see around is green plantain.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand this because a lot of people are going to be curious. What differentiates somebody who does better on green plantain versus carnivore? Is it the fact that if they've damaged their microbiome, carnivore is next best? And then if they still have their original birth microbes, they want to feed them with the plantain? Get into the nuance there.
Yeah, so this is a spicy subject, but we're gonna get into it. I'm not gonna get fans from this, so I'm gonna tell you guys I'm gonna tell you guys what's going on. So when I was first practicing, carnivore was magic, especially for MCAD, histamine disorders, schizophrenia. It was a slam dunk. But it was not something that people had to stay on. And now, even famous cases, you see lots of famous cases, people are kind of stuck on it. And they may not feel stuck. They're grateful to feel better, right? So I don't mean to downplay the incredible achievements that they have gotten, but it is unusual that they can't move off. Usually, that lack of a movement where they can't eat other foods again, or where they become more and more sensitive, they have to do more and more fasting, they can eat less and less foods. That has to do far more with a lack of the birth microbes and the mucin eaters more than anything else. Because let's say you have chronic strep, it is eating your mucin down. And since no one ever talks about mucin, let's have a little nerdy class about mucin. Do you guys want to hear about mucin?
Definitely.
Okay, so when you lack mucin, when your mucin is in a collapse, right, this never-ending story, nothing that we're seeing of a mucosal collapse, histamines are through the roof. So the classic histamine disorders of you're producing too much or you're not clearing, the methods for that aren't working because the production is coming from the imbalance in the mucosa. And same thing with our sex hormones. So everyone's injecting their hormones, right? And doing these different things. But if you have mucosal collapse because you have Klebsiella, just, having a buffet on your mucosa every day, uh, then, then your sex hormones are going to be extremely off. You can present as a female, you can present as too little estrogen or too much. You can present as fully perimenopausal, like Karen style. And as a man, you can present with almost no testosterone, right? Or too much estrogen. And so your histamines are through the roof. You're not balancing your hormones, and your feel good chemicals are getting blocked along with your melatonin. And you know why the melatonin is getting blocked?
No.
It's so cool. Melatonin is extremely antimicrobial, extremely. And these smart little microbes know that. So if you have this little cluster of these mucin eaters that don't get starved out on the medical diets, they will go in and eat the precursors to the melatonin because the melatonin will kill them. So these people can't sleep. And no limbic exercise is going to beat that. Sorry, folks. You got to get the bugs.
So when it comes to getting these bugs that are affecting this mucin layer, do we see those in the tests that you were talking about early on?
Yeah, the GI map, definitely. Some of them you see them, some of them you don't. A lot of the microbial testing will not tell you the number or the type of microbe. It'll just say strep, and you don't know if it's the beneficial or the pathogenic or the opportunistic. So I like GI map right now. I may change if more brands come out. But right now I like GI map because at least for the major players, you can see if it's the goodies or the baddies.
Okay, and then when it comes to treating them, if you have the bad ones, to me, there would likely be two different ways of approaching that: bringing in certain good guys to push them out and kill them, or using something that's antimicrobial. Talk about what that looks like.
So what I like to do, and I do a different thing based on the level of mucosal collapse, but I'll bring in, I've charted out the microbial antagonists that work for all of these. And so some will produce actually like killing things against the pathogen or pseudopathogen. Others will take over the land space in the body, so push it out. Others neutralize the toxin. So I'll usually bring in a probiotic that's going to act as a probiotic or a beneficial microbial antagonist. So it's going to go to war for you. It's going to kill that little guy. Now, some of them have very strong biofilms, some don't, but a lot of the ones I see do. So I'll bring in an appropriate biofilm burster for that. And that's very often something that's commonly used in other situations. It's the timing in which it's had. And then if it's something like the Shiga toxin E. coli or something that produces a toxin and the toxin is the biggest problem, then we bring in a toxin neutralizer as well. So like for Shiga toxin, which this isn't going to be very relevant, not that many people get that kind of food poisoning, but if you get the Shiga toxin, Saccharomyces boulardii binds to that toxin and pulls it out of the body, preventing the damage to the body. So it's always a one-prong approach at least, and then sometimes two. I almost never use antimicrobials, almost never. There are exceptions, like to Pseudomonas. I'll use both, but yeah.
Let's come back to biofilms. Talk about what those are and give some examples of different things that you use to break through them.
So biofilms are, if you think of a castle, the biofilm is the moat that protects the castle from invading armies. So biofilms are what the microbes create to hide from the immune system, to hide from the tests, and to proliferate. Right, they're very sticky. They can go into unusual places. So if you take Enterococcus, someone could have a chronic kidney infection with Enterococcus in their urine, which is smell. Their partners will notice it, but they keep going back to the doctors, and the doctor is like, "You're fine," because they're testing for 4 microbes. But Enterococcus is not one of the ones they test for, right? So it's sticking there with its biofilms. Biofilms are very sticky. One of the things that helps you get at Enterococcus biofilms is hibiscus tea, but not everyone can do this, of course. I just do it for pleasure. The So biofilms are a way that the microbes protect themselves, and some of the microbes have gotten stronger biofilms, and in fact, some will get stronger biofilms in relation to your environment. And this is something important to know. So many of these microbes don't like black mold, and some of the other toxic molds to humans. So if you already have some of these overgrowths and then you move into a moldy environment, your microbes will actually get stronger, the pathogens and the mucus eating, yeah, because they're protecting themselves from the mold, and so they'll get fierce biofilms around them, and so that's where people can just feel like they're never gonna get better, right? Everything affects them, and they're gonna have to live in the desert in a tent. That's where we get that from, and the feeling is accurate because that's what they're experiencing, but the way to go about it is, strategy. You need strategy for that. So, uh, different microbes, the biofilms require different things. So it's too intricate to go into here, but I'll say my favorite in general is using NAC, because I don't see a lot of die off from that. I don't see a lot of bad from it. And most people have it in their house already. Someone's recommended it for liver health, they're cleansing, it's very inexpensive. It's the way you take it, though, that makes it appropriate for biofilms. So if you take it first thing in the morning, or just at least an hour away from other supplements, probiotics, foods, electrolytes and water are fine, but no medications. Then it can get at the biofilms. And then an hour later, then you can bring in your little military to take care of the things. And that tends to work extremely well. So it's not going to work for all microbes. They do have specific ones, but that's your safest bet.
All right, I want to make sure we cover this in detail. And obviously, it's going to depend on the case and what's going on. But for somebody out there who can't afford or doesn't have access to the testing, we now know the NAC is part of this. But there's 3 different parts. There's also the toxins and then the bacteria or microbes. So what would a full protocol look like in a general sense to go in there and bust things up, if you can give that? Because obviously, again, it's very different depending on the case.
That would actually be a book. That would be a book. But I am working on that for you guys. I am. I've been writing it all year. So because I'm trying to get this to households that don't have the money for testing, because that's just the reality of it. And there is a way you can go about it to act as if. But I actually wouldn't start with NAC. I would start with feeding the birth microbes first, so you have some immunity, and getting lots of daylight, laughter, dancing. Then I would bring in and real food, right? So your meat, your fish, what have you, real fats, but not too high. Not too high. If you've got the mucin eaters, actually less ketosis. You know, I'm a fan of ketosis, but like streptococcus and ketosis are not buds. They're not buds. So more traditional diet, lots of touch, lots of laughter, lots of dance. Feed the birth microbes, and then start planting, and you plant them with their food, like the L-fermentum with the HMO. And then you could go in with the NAC, maybe like a month or 2 later, and start to kind of rebuild. In general, if you go to the supplement store and a microbe has the numbers after it, you'll be able to look up a lot of the benefits for it. So you can see what you might be benefiting from, and what might be good to plant for you.
Okay, just to make sure we're comprehensive here, you mentioned feeding the birth microbes. What does that look like again, specifically?
Yeah, I know this is a whole new big topic, and this is not something the public or most of the field knows about, but those are the different foods that are like arabinogalactin, shrimp shells. So in many parts of the world, they grind up shrimp shells or crawfish shells as well, and they use it as a seasoning. That's one of the foods for the birth microbes. A lot of the dairy things are simply because of breast milk, right, and HMO. There's different foods that you can get for that are non-dairy, of course, because not all cultures consume dairy, and large arabinogalactans. So, like when I was at the Sami a couple years ago, the Sami are traditional folk up in the Nordic parts of uh, uh, Sweden and Norway and Finland and Russia. They drink and they use the bark of the larch tree and of the birch tree, right? So a lot of traditional cultures use the barks, and the barks actually have a lot of the foods for the birth microbes. So those are some two things like green plantain resistant starch. I don't recommend potato or corn resistant starch, but the more natural forms, those kind of things.
Okay. Before we move forward, in the most simplest form, somebody who's an adult right now, even with what you just shared, there's a lot of different substrates. What can this look like? Somebody who, again, can't afford or doesn't have access to testing, but they want to prioritize their gut health. They're an adult. They've lived a pretty conventional life. What does that look like simplifying best you can? I know it's complicated, but with all the different strains and numbers and different substrates to feed, it's could be overwhelming for somebody and they might just throw in the towel and not try what we're talking about. So let's try and simplify it best we can to at least get them started exactly what they need here.
Yeah, I don't know if I can right now because I'm simplifying it for myself. So this isn't, I would say this is really different than our other ones in that I'm introducing what's being created right now to solve a very major problem because it's not just our gut health. Every organ has a microbiome, and it affects everything. So, so this is really an introduction to what we can do. And what most of my work has been is in collecting these microbes and then making this into a digestible uh, tool, content, knowledge for you all to use, but it's not out yet because this is a lot of work on my end. So I don't have the simple solution for you yet. What I want you to know is that this is not we're not at a lost mission. We have a window of time to fix it and we are working on it and it's coming out. But the reality is sometimes when we've created enormous destruction to a system we weren't aware of, the coming back from it is not easy and it's not simple and it's not three things. And we could look at politics, for instance, right? When there's a revolution, everyone thinks, yay, it's going to be new. And then the new regime is like awful and you have to rebuild the whole country and all the buildings are gone. We're doing that with our bodies right now. We're rebuilding after a lot of medical damage, unbeknownst and without purpose. So a lot of this is rebuilding. So really, and just for your information, fun tidbits, because these microbes are amazing. And and they're our friends. They're our little friends. So the best thing you can do right now is stop the killing when appropriate, right? So if you have a sinus infection, personally, I wouldn't take an antibiotic, right? If it's something deadly, of course. And that's just for myself. You need to make your own choices. But keep an eye out for more products coming to the line to help the microbiome of the skin, of the nasal passages, of the mouth, and test them out for yourselves. And in the meantime, actually, I do have one thing that you can do for sure. The uh, you can, if you can do yogurt or even coconut yogurt, a lot of the strains, the birth strains that we've been able to isolate and turn into a supplement we can cultivate into a yogurt. So you can save a ton of money by buying one bottle and then cultivating that strain into a yogurt. Dr. William Davis teaches in his book how to do that with Ruddick yogurt, but you could use that same recipe with the other microbes. So that would be a way that would be very affordable to start repopulating. And the best part is that in the nature of feeding that microbe in the yogurt, so he has you use inulin, uh, you feed the microbe in the yogurt, so you don't have to think about also feeding the microbe. Now, some countries are ahead of us. Like if you go to Korea, they have row upon row upon row of medical yogurt in the yogurt aisles. I mean, there's like 8 yogurt aisles. They're gargantuan, and they are allowed to say what it is for. And in the lid, it has the little food for the microbe, and then you drink the yogurt, and it helps to replant. So most countries are ahead of us in this, right? So, yes, yeah. But right now, the main thing is to stop the damage as much as possible, boost the oxytocin, get back to traditional ways as much as possible because there's so much about the body that we don't know, and our hubris has hurt us more than it's helped us. So, I do that.
Let's come back to the carnivore piece. I feel like there's still some details we got to hash out in that realm. There's the green plantain, which can be a good thing feeding the microbiome. There's a lot of people doing the carnivore thing saying no plants at all. Talk about how you see that now. You did get into it, but I feel like, again, we have to hash it out more. Is it that carnivore can be good for people in the beginning, and then things like green plantain over time are essential when the healing's been done to get to that next level?
Yeah, what I would say now with the current mucosal collapse, which is very different than 10, 15 years ago, but with the current mucosal collapse, ideally you would get a GI map done so that you can see if you have these mucosal eaters. Because if you have the mucosal eaters, or if you're lacking the birth microbes, you're likely to be one of the ones stuck on the diet that can't move on. And the histamines are still an issue, and you have to do lots of fasting, right? So this isn't against the carnivore diet. It's a strategy where you can go in a bit smarter. So if you know that those things are a factor, then you can start addressing them from the beginning, and you can start with tiny sprinkles of things. Right? A lot of times, and I work with the most sensitive of the most sensitive people that really cannot do anything with food or lifestyle. I mean, really, everything affects them. So supplements are out, and of course, vegetables are out, and all of that. But with the birth microbial food, you can do a pinprick, right? You don't need what we think of as a serving. These microbes can eat very little amounts of things. And so even if what we're using we think of as small, like 1/32 of a teaspoon, if you're having a reaction to that, do a 32nd of that. Do even less, because the birth microbes can live on that. And so you can do tiny little strategic amounts while you get the benefit of the carnivore diet or the other medical diets, because those are, I wouldn't have healed without those diets, right? Those diets are amazing. But as our microbiome has shifted, new things are needed. We have a new generation of microbiomes. And so for some, those will still work like it did for me. And for others, it won't. And what I'm seeing in even the natural health communities, in the uh, dietary communities, is a lot of people being told at the year, 2 year mark, well, you haven't done it hard enough. You didn't do it right. You clearly missed this. You need to do it much longer. When very often they have a species of microbe that's eating their mucosa and causing havoc. And so I think it's wise to be looking at the birth microbes, making sure we're not starving those out. I think that's only responsible. And at this point, with what we know now, and feed those little guys, and then address any mucosal eaters. So you can do them at the same time. You can still use the diets plus that. But I wouldn't go in blindly right now.
For somebody on an all meat diet, they feel like they could introduce, say, the plantain fiber, but they're feeling good on what they're on. What I want to make sure we get to here is there additional benefit, or is there a certain longevity to that diet for that person for them to start including some of this?
Different things work for different folks. So always go with what feels best. Always. Don't let me talk you out of anything. But, you know, on paper, logically, the birth microbes have a time span that they can live without their foods. And so if you feel really great, keep doing what you're doing. But if it were me, with the knowledge that I now have, and that I will get to as soon as I can, I would put sprinkles in. It doesn't mean you have to eat a handful of something, but sprinkles daily to keep those birth microbes alive, because those make our feel good chemicals. They produce our vitamins for us, which allows us to not have to eat a varied diet. They produce minerals for us and all sorts of things. They fight pathogens, and they help us sleep. They do all the things that we are wanting. So they're rather important, so I would try to keep those alive if at all possible.
Whether it be from an extreme elimination diet like a carnivore diet or fasting, can you see benefit in the short term by using those to starve off a lot of the bad guys, and then using that as a springboard to move towards what you're talking about now?
I used to, and that's what I always taught. I'm just seeing less of that with the mucosal collapse. Yeah, because the mucosal collapse is a whole new thing that we're dealing with. Yeah, but in general, yes, I've always seen it as a cast. You do those so that you can restabilize the microbiome. The issue is that was in the days of beneficial, opportunistic, and pathogenic microbes. And we're finding that there's Other groups like mucin eaters that we didn't have to deal with before, and now we're really dealing with a lot of them. Um, so it's just in flux right now.
And does this, I assume it does, tie back to your change of thoughts about the GAPS diet?
Completely, completely, because it doesn't take these into account at all, and so it can starve out the birth microbes while letting these really eat your mucosa. And so, yeah, I've just seen that be utterly ignored. And I think it's a lot cheaper to get one GI map than to go through 2 years of why am I not getting better?
And by the sounds of it, these microbes are relatively new for us. Where did they come from?
They're from a lot of uh, they're from a lot of things. Like I've seen a lot of people get them from raw milk. Raw milk is either a superfood or a deadly food, depending on how it's handled. It has to be handled with great respect. The tribes I go to handle it with great respect. I've seen a lot of places not handle it with respect. Now, those are not in America. America has such strict laws. Oh my gosh, our dairies are amazing. Yeah, we're good. We're good. They would get shut down so fast, but I have seen terrible things in the UK. I have seen some terrible things. And so people will go and get what they think is very good, a superfood, right? With the vitamins and the things that we're missing, the vitamin A and the D and the K, and end up with pseudomonas and Shiga toxin E. coli and staph and all the things from the milk. So don't just know your farmer if you're outside of America. Go and look at the facilities and make sure you're sterilizing and doing things appropriately. Make sure there's no chickens around. All right, cross contamination is a thing, but but so a lot of them come that way. It can also be from our weakened immune systems due to our microbiome collapse, but also just our environment and the light exposure. So a child can pick up strep as they do, and instead of getting throat infection, it can go into the nervous system, go chronic. Now we're seeing that in adults. I see that in a lot of adults. So again, that speaks to immune suppression, quite a bit of that, and also a lack of the beneficial microbes that protect against that. So, so it's pretty easy to pick these up, and then travel, travel, right? Street food and fresh water when traveling, absolutely.
When it comes to our microbes as a whole, there's bacteria, viruses, parasites. How do you look at that whole orchestra and others, if there are that I haven't mentioned, and what we want to do to assess and work with all of that in a healthy way?
Oh, great question. So I usually like to take someone's full history. Like, I want to know the infections they had when they were 3 and 7, because that's going to show me what they were already missing in their microbiome, right? For them to get those infections. So, like, if they had tuberculosis, I know they're missing Rhamnosus GG from the get go. And they haven't picked that up somewhere. So I would go way back to that. Viruses, usually people have tested for and they know if they have them or not. There's some exceptions. I always look at where they travel and their familial history. Uh, and like some things get really missed, like leptospirosis. I catch a lot of that. So there's some things that get missed. And then for parasites, if I want to rule that out, I always use the same guy. He's a parasitologist. He tests much more than the stool. So we'll look there. But we still look at cytokines. So if you want to get a clearer picture, you can do a cytokine panel, which is different branches of the immune system. So there's inflammatory cytokines and anti-inflammatory cytokines. And if you're not sure, like let's say you show up with a parasite, but it's not specific which one it is, like or let's even just say an amoeba, right? Then you can look at your cytokine panel and your travel history and narrow it down pretty well as to what you might be dealing with. So there's ways to sleuth that are that take a lot of time on my end to do. But there's ways to get down there and kind of like look into and see what's going on. So that's kind of how I go about it.
But sometimes are these other microbes, along with the bacteria, part of a healthy microbiome?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have so many beneficial fungi, and we have really beneficial microbes. So it's uh, The mistake that I think we made around the 40s through the 90s of like antibiotics and sterilization and all of this was that we, one, lost a lot of the traditional important methods of like keeping raw milk clean. Okay. But, and then we killed a lot of the microbiome without knowing what it was. But we also looked at all these microbes as bad. And I'm seeing right now two camps, and both are problematic. I see the one that we all know about, which is the microbes are bad, OCD, let's clean everything, right? We all know that one. But equally, and I'm even seeing it in my field, I'm seeing what I think is actually very unhealthy, and that is that all microbes are friendly. Let me tell you, all microbes are not friendly at all. Quite the opposite. So we have ones that are our best friends, and we have ones that should not be in our microbiome. And we do need to be mindful of. The tribes are mindful of them. They avoid them through tradition and through reverence. So, if you're one of those folks who wants to go and start a homestead, I would say really learn how things were done in ancient ways because they knew how to make the food safe and us healthier and our microbiome healthier without all the microscopes and the testing. But they certainly didn't just assume all microbes were friendly.
Let's come back to our plantain flour and expand out to fiber as a whole. I think it's important we make a distinction here because in our world, in conventional thinking, there is this assumption that fiber's good, eat the rainbow, the more the better, and we're going to feed the microbes, the good ones, with that, and in turn, they're going to produce short-chain fatty acids, and all is good. So talk about fiber from that perspective as well.
So that was just not helpful advice for the public, right? And I think most people who have been chronically ill have really felt that because in general, the less fiber you eat, the better you feel. The reason for that is that fiber feeds indiscriminately to some degree. So if you have a lot of overgrowths in your microbiome, it's going to feed the overgrowths and you can get more sick. If you have a lot of beneficial microbes, it's going to feed those and you can get healthier. But the advice was given to people that don't have a healthy microbiome. They're being born today in the last 30 years. So in general, fiber has been more problematic, which is where a lot of the ancestral diets that were low fiber really came in to save the day and help people get into remission from impossible conditions, right? So that's where you've got like carnivore and these low fiber diets or zero fiber diets. And that can be really useful. And then there's these little types of really more like glyconutrients, long chain polysaccharides that are much more medical. And these feed the little microbes. So I never ask anyone to sit down and eat a salad, for instance. Right? We might just be adding a little sprinkle of one of these guys. So fiber can be your friend or your foe. And based on yourself because you feel it. So if you eat a lot and you feel worse or your illness doesn't go away, you're in the camp that needs to eat way less and have very soft food that lets the little villi regrow. And that should be followed, definitely.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
We're all born with about 200 very important microbes, and they're starting to go endangered. Now we're lucky to get a handful. We're missing a lot of them, and I think as soon as the public starts to learn about how important these are, there's going to be a massive race.